Okay, we are live. Go ahead and start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our online Elder Abuse Restraining Order presentation by APAWLA and Tzedek. APAWLA stands for the Asian Pacific American Women Lawyers Alliance, which is an organization promoting inclusion, empowerment, and advancement of APA women lawyers in the legal profession, devoted to advocating, educating, and mentoring within the profession and larger community. This short presentation will provide an overview of the Elder Restraining Order process and related housing and eviction issues presented by our speaker, Daniel Lewis. My co-chair of APAWLA's Pro Bono Committee, Ayano, will introduce Daniel before we head into the presentation.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to introduce Daniel Lewis, who is an Equal Justice Fellow on Tzedek's Elder Justice team. Daniel's work focuses on preventing elder abuse and preserving home ownership by protecting elders from housing-related fraud. Daniel also works on Tzedek's Self-Help Elder Abuse Restraining Order Clinic, providing assistance to victims of elder abuse in Los Angeles. Daniel previously worked on Tzedek's Impact Team, protecting homeowners from abuses by the Property Assessed Clean Energy PACE program. And with that, Daniel, please begin your presentation.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Daniel Lewis. I'm an Equal Justice Works Fellow at Tzedek. I work on our Self-Help Elder Abuse Restraining Order Clinic, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. And I do have a presentation to share. Okay, great. So today, as I said, I want to talk about elder abuse restraining orders, which is one of the tools, the sort of intervention tools we have for elder abuse, where we're stepping in after abuse has occurred and using a restraining order, preventing it from continuing. I wanted to give some examples of situations where an elder abuse restraining order might be appropriate. And I also wanted to talk to you about Tzedek's Self-Help Elder Abuse Restraining Order Clinic. And I also wanted to then talk about some sort of overlap between housing issues and elder abuse restraining orders. And finally, I wanted to talk about the potential for eviction from this process and some of the issues there. And then we can leave some time at the end for Q&A. So what is an elder abuse restraining order? So basically, it's a court order that protects older and dependent adults from abuse. It can take many forms. It's very flexible. So it can, for instance, mandate that somebody stay a certain distance away from you or from your home or your job or your workplace, or even loved ones. You can protect family members or caregivers under a restraining order for yourself. So it can also say that somebody can't contact you or visit you, or maybe can only contact or visit you under certain circumstances, or via certain mediums, like maybe no in-person contact, but can contact you via text message. It can even order someone also to move out of your home, which we will talk about quite a bit later. And it can, as I said, it's a flexible tool. So it can do various things if you can convince a judge to grant it. And we'll talk about some of those things as well. So if you get a restraining order through this process, and somebody who's committing abuse then violates the terms of the restraining order. Say it says that, a person can't come within 10 yards of your home, and then they do that, and you call the police, then there are legal consequences for that person, either fines or jail time. And the reason this exists is in recognition of heightened vulnerability of certain groups in our community to abuse. And this tool is meant to protect people who are 65 or older, or who are a dependent adult, which I will also define. later. And in recognition of this sort of heightened vulnerability to abuse, there's what's called a lower standard of proof to get this type of restraining order compared to other types of restraining orders. So it's slightly easier to get. And so I've been referring to abuse. So what kind of abuse can count to get a restraining order? So we have here the categories. It can be physical abuse, which is what you would think it is, pushing somebody, unwanted touching, hitting, sexual abuse, things like that. It also includes mental abuse, which includes things like intimidation or threats, verbal harassment. It can be financial abuse, which is, taking or using your property without your consent, basically. And then it can also include a couple other things like neglect. So if somebody is your caregiver or is in a caregiving relationship where they have responsibility for your well-being, but they're not providing that care, that can be a basis for an elder abuse restraining order. And then isolation. So sort of isolating somebody from their friends or family, like preventing visits, or going through your mail or intercepting phone calls, things like that can be a basis for an elder abuse restraining order. So there are a lot of different things that can count as abuse, basically. So I wanted to go over a couple examples, just so people get an idea. So our first example, we have Mike. Mike is 68. He's falling behind on his mortgage since he retired. And so in order to get a little money, he's now renting a room in his home. He was introduced to Tina. Tina moves in. She's a good tenant. She's paying rent every month. But then after 2 months, she stops paying and she starts becoming aggressive towards Mike because, he's looking for rent. And so Mike, the aggression has gotten so bad that Mike is now hiding in his bedroom whenever Tina's out in the common areas. And Tina threatens Mike that if he ever tries to evict her son, who's in a gang, will bring his friends by. And Mike gets scared by that and he starts withdrawing from his social activities. So this is a type of case, we see every once in a while. A renter moves in and decides to stop paying rent and then threatens the person when asked for the money. Oh, sorry, there we go. And this could be a couple different types of abuse. Obviously, the threats and the intimidation can be the basis for an elder abuse restraining order. And then also, if Mike is he's organized his financial life around renting a room in his home, and now that person's not paying rent, that could arguably be financial abuse as well. So this might be an area where maybe a restraining order would be in order. And as we can talk about later, Mike might be able to get a move out order here as well. Another example, so Mary is 70. She's living with her adult son, John. John helps Mary with some of the basic tasks, but he has his own mental illness, and he's dependent upon alcohol. And to fund his alcohol dependency, he's taking Mary's debit card and he's taking her Social Security money and he's spending it on alcohol. And so Mary doesn't have money to buy food. She's always short at the end of the month. She hasn't been to the doctor in over a year. And when her other kids express some concerns about John, Mary becomes very defensive of him because, he's her son too. And she says that she doesn't want him to leave. And John has told Mary that, if it weren't for him, the other siblings would place her in a nursing home. So again, there's some various different types of abuse here. Obviously, the financial abuse, taking her debit card and spending her SSI money on alcohol, that can be basis of a restraining order. If John has a caregiving relationship with Mary and is not taking her to the doctor, and he really should be, that can be the basis of a restraining order. If he's trying to sort of sequester Mary away from her other kids, that can be another form of abuse. However, another dynamic is at play here, I think, which is Mary may not want to get a restraining order against John. So if Mary doesn't, it may have to be somebody else who has legal authority to ask for a restraining order for Mary. And if that doesn't exist, there are going to be some hurdles to climb, but we can go over that as well. So who is eligible to request an elder abuse restraining order? So the statute that governs restraining orders protects a few different classes of people. The first is people who are older than 65. So if you're older than 65, you are eligible for an elder abuse restraining order. The other category that's big is dependent adults. So dependent adults are people who are at least 18 years old, and they have some sort of physical or mental limitation that sort of restricts their ability to carry out like normal day-to-day living activities, whether that's, could be cooking or cleaning, self-grooming, things like that. And also, if the limitation affects somebody's ability to defend themselves, they're more likely to be considered a dependent adult and eligible for this this type of restraining order. And it can also protect people with developmental disabilities that appear before 18, things like cerebral palsy or epilepsy or autism. And then the person asking for the restraining order has to have been a victim of at least one of the types of abuse that we went over earlier. So that's who's eligible to get a restraining order, which is a different question than who can actually ask a court to do a restraining order for somebody. So there are different categories of people who are legally eligible. So first, the person who's suffering the abuse can always ask for one for themselves. As we saw in the example with Mary, it may be that the person may not want a restraining order, or in other instances, they may not be able to actually ask for one. So commonly we get calls from concerned family who are saying, my older mother has Alzheimer's, and here's all the types of abuse she's suffering. And, I know she's suffering abuse. I've seen it. Maybe Adult Protective Services has come and they've seen it, but she has Alzheimer's and she doesn't have the capability of asking for a restraining order for herself. So there are different people who can have legal authority to ask for a restraining order. And I have some of the different categories of folks here. So if you're a conservator over somebody else, you can have authority to ask for a restraining order over the conserved person. If you are a named trustee in like a living trust, you might have authority to ask for a restraining order. If you have a power of attorney, the other person has granted you power of attorney, you might have the power to ask for a restraining order on their behalf. And that one I've seen, it really helps if the power of attorney specifically grants authority to initiate lawsuits on the other person's behalf. And then there's a category called guardian ad litem, which can ask for a restraining order for an elder or dependent adult. Basically, this is a situation where a court grants legal authority and guardianship over the other person just in that one court proceeding. So when would this happen? Basically, if somebody hasn't set up sort of what we would call an advanced planning relationship with somebody else, and they haven't, they're not conserved, they haven't created a trust, they've never given anyone power of attorney, and now they have some inability to ask for a restraining order, and maybe they really need one. It's possible for a third person to ask a court to be named guardian ad litem over that person, which is just, again, a temporary guardianship relationship to ask for a restraining order for them. And the requirement is that the person who is guardian ad litem either has to be an attorney themselves or they have to be represented by an attorney. And then the last category, so this really only applies outside of LA County, but Adult Protective Services is allowed to ask for a restraining order on someone else's behalf. But LA County as a practice is not doing this. If you live in LA County, APS currently is not going to be able to ask for a restraining order for you. And if you're not one of these people, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't call for help if there's an abusive situation going on. We can make referrals to places that might be able to assist in a situation, or maybe you want to explore doing a conservatorship over the person if they lack capacity, or figure out a guardian ad litem situation for them to ask for the restraining order. And if you call us for help and you want somebody else, you are the person who's suffering abuse and you want somebody else to ask for a restraining order for you, you can also explore giving somebody a power of attorney in order to ask for one. So what do these do? Why would you even get one of these? I've mentioned some of the reasons earlier, but the elder abuse restraining order can be sort of a flexible solution in some instances. So you can ask for what's called a stay away order, which would typically be 100 yards. It gives you like a 100-yard buffer, and people can't come within that distance of you. So that's one thing you can ask for. If the abuser is, say, a roommate or a neighbor, you can ask for a lesser stay away order. So like I had a case once where person was, they were being abused. They were living in a house with the abuser, but they felt protected if they could just get like a 5-foot restraining order. And the abuser was a family member, and they had some sympathy for them, and they really didn't want them to move out. So they were like, okay, if I got a 5-foot restraining order and they come within 5 feet, and then I can call the police, if they do that, I'm okay with that. I don't want them to have to move out as long as they can stop the abuse with this restraining order. So that can be modified. Conduct orders, so can prohibit people from engaging in specific types of conduct or communication, or maybe limits to certain types of communication. They can't come contact me in person, but they can send me an email asking for rent if they're a landlord, maybe. Or my son, unfortunately, is abusing me and I can't be around him, but he is my son. I want one supervised visit a month, or one phone call a month, or something like that. A restraining order can ask somebody to move out in certain circumstances, which is essentially an eviction. And I will talk about that because that's a very important remedy in a minute. You can ask for custody of a shared animal. You can ask for the person to undergo anger management classes. It's very flexible, and there's a space for you to ask for other types of restraining order, or other types of conduct orders or other things if there's a certain circumstance that doesn't fall under one of these. Okay, so now I want to talk about the move out order. So a move out order, as I said, it's essentially an eviction. It tells the other person they can't live there anymore. They have to leave. Police come and escort them out. This is a strong remedy. The person asking for it has to be on title, or has to be on the lease, or has to have permission to be there. Essentially, they have to be able to legally say that they can be there. The other person can also be on title or on the lease as a co-tenant, and you can still ask for a move-out order against them. So the situation where you can't ask for a move-out order is where the abuser is the one who has permission to live there, and the petitioner, the person who's asking for the restraining order, doesn't have permission. You can't then send the person who has a legal ability to live there away. So here's some examples. The first one, say 2 roommates are sharing an apartment. The elder roommate can ask for a restraining order against the other roommate. If an elder is living with their child and only the child is on the lease, the elder can't make the child move out. They're the one who's on the lease, the elder's not. If an elder is seeking a restraining order against their next door neighbor, they can't ask the neighbor to be evicted from their property. It's going to have to be some sort of modified stay away order at best, right? You can't come within 10 feet of me while I'm on my property or something like that. But you can't force your neighbors to move out. We call these sometimes neighbor disputes. They happen quite often. Neighbors are hurling insults back and forth, and then someone asks, can I get them evicted from their property? No. There are different types of restraining orders that I want to go over. There's a few different ones in the civil realm and then a couple in the criminal realm. So we've went over EARO. You have to be 65 or older or a dependent adult. You can get a move out order. There's a lower standard of proof, and you don't have to have a qualifying relationship. What's a qualifying relationship? Well, it's something that's required by a domestic violence restraining order. So domestic violence restraining order is kind of similar to EARO, where there's a recognition that people in domestic relationships might have a higher vulnerability of abuse. So if you're dating somebody, if you're living with somebody, if you're their spouse or relative, that's the kind of qualifying relationship where courts say, okay, there's a greater chance of abuse because of this relationship. You can also get a move out order under a DVRO. It's also slightly easier to get. And there are some remedies that relate to some of these qualifying relationships, like if there are shared bank accounts, you might want to talk to somebody about a domestic violence restraining order. And then lastly, there's civil harassment restraining order, which is sort of a general restraining order. You don't have to be a certain age, you don't have to have the qualifying relationship, but it's slightly harder to get, and you can't get a move out order through it. There's a couple different types of criminal restraining orders as well. So there's an emergency protective order, which we like to tell people about. This is for, real emergencies where there's an immediate present danger of elder abuse. A police officer, they have access to a special judge. When they come out, if there's a need for a restraining order right then, this is what they would sort of grant, the criminal emergency protective order. It's a short restraining order, so it lasts about 7 days. And because it only lasts 7 days, that gives people time to then seek a different type of civil restraining order after that. There are also different types of criminal protective orders. These are requested by a district attorney in connection with a criminal case. These can last up to 10 years. So these aren't, I just decide I need a restraining order, I'm going to Tzedek to ask them to help me get one. There's a criminal case ongoing and the district attorney is requesting it. So how do we help people get restraining orders? So we have a self-help elder abuse restraining order clinic. We're currently entirely remote. So we conduct our intakes over the phone, and then we put together the petition, and we work with people that way. We're open Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We aim to respond to all calls and emails within 2 business hours on clinic days. And we have our phone number here and our email where you can get in contact with us. And because we work with a translation service, we can assist callers in any language. So if let's see, and then I just want to go over the process for getting one. Specifically through our clinic. So the way it works is we have a voicemail account and email account. People get in contact with us. We do the intake over the phone. We call people back. We have a list of questions we need to get. And then we use the information that we obtain to put together a restraining order petition, which is essentially various different types of forms that need to be submitted in order to ask for a restraining order. And then we also provide instructional guides. We have very detailed handouts on the whole restraining order process, from taking it to the court and filing it with the court, to serving it on the other party, to preparing your case at the hearing, and how you would handle different types of evidence like videos or text messages. If you get in contact with us, and you have all the information ready and any evidence you want, we can put together a restraining order petition fairly quickly, either same day or next day. However, I want to go over the self-help nature of our clinic. So what is a self-help clinic? Essentially, we are providing information for people to come and get a restraining order. And we're providing basic assistance with the petition. But even though we're lawyers, we are not representing anybody through this clinic, which means once we put together the petition, we sort of pass it back to you with all the instructions you would need to know. And then you take it from there. So you would take it to the court and file it. You would have to arrange service on the other party, which is fairly straightforward, usually through the sheriff's department. And then you have to go to the hearing and explain why you need to be protected by a restraining order. The other side is also going to get a chance to come to the hearing and explain why they think that they shouldn't be restrained by a protective order. And so interactions through our clinic, we do a pretty good job getting these petitions out quickly, but there is no lawyer-client relationship between you and us. The goal of that is just to help more people. If we're representing everybody through the hearing, we can only help a few people with these, but with this model, we can help a bunch of people every week. And then I want to go over just sort of the timeline, just so people have an idea. So once the petition is ready, maybe you called us on Monday, the petition's ready on Tuesday, you take it to the court on Wednesday and you file the restraining order. So you're going to get a hearing date 3 weeks later where you have to go back to court and explain why you need to be protected by this restraining order. However, on the day that you file the restraining order, the judge is going to review everything that you submit, and they're going to decide if there needs to be a temporary restraining order effective until the hearing. And that's, for obvious reasons, you don't want to serve the other side with a restraining order without protection, right? Otherwise, there could be more abuse. So frequently a judge will say, okay, I don't know yet. I haven't been able to talk to the parties about what happened, but I'm going to grant this temporary restraining order just to make sure nothing happens before the hearing. You also have to serve the restraining order on the other side at least 5 days before the hearing. So that's day 16. The most common service method is through the sheriff. As I said, they have offices in each courthouse. It's fairly straightforward. However, they will make 3 attempts to serve the other side. And if they're not able to do that, then there are going to be issues at the hearing. And that brings me to sort of another requirement for elder abuse restraining order. You have to serve it on the other side, which means you have to know where the person lives. If it's an unknown person, maybe you don't know their name, maybe you don't know where they live, but they committed some sort of abuse against you, it's very difficult to get a restraining order on that person because the court's not going to grant it. The sheriff's not going to serve it. So those are some hurdles we sometimes run into. I want to quickly, I guess, did we have any questions so far? Okay, is there help or materials available in any other languages beside English and Spanish? Currently, our materials are just in English and Spanish, I believe, but we can talk with people in other languages and we can try and work around that. Does an EARO carry the same effect as a regular DVRO or civil harassment restraining order? So yeah, if you get a stay away order, that's going to basically have the same effect. But as I said, there are sort of different remedies available. For DVRO, it would relate to maybe something with a shared bank account. And for EARO and DVRO, you can get move out orders, whereas civil harassment order, you can't. Just quickly, because I know we're towards the end here. Frequently, we get calls from landlords and tenants about elder abuse issues. My tenant didn't pay their rent. Isn't that financial abuse? My landlord is harassing me for the rent. Isn't that harassment? So it has to be more than just kind of a standard landlord-tenant issue. There's a totally different eviction process that is meant for landlord-tenant issues. Courts are very wary of move-out orders requested by a landlord against a tenant. It really has to rise to the level of abuse that we talked about earlier in order to be granted. And then for eviction issues, we are currently referring everybody to Stay Housed LA, which is an organization that's talking and working with a lot of tenants right now around eviction issues. And there's their phone number and website. And then we help with some other issues as well at Tzedek. If you have issues with your home ownership, if you want to set up advanced planning, if you have questions about conservatorships, small claims, public benefits, we do a lot of things here. And then here's my info for any general questions. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Daniel for this very informative presentation. I know that we already took a couple questions, but if we could have another short Q&A, if anybody has any last minute questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box to your right.
I don't see any other questions coming up.
Okay. So, well, we're going to wrap things up at this time. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, everyone, on behalf of APAWLA for attending our Elder Abuse Restraining Order presentation. We hope you found this presentation helpful, and we hope to see you at our next one. So have a wonderful rest of your weekend.